Amy shielded her eyes against the spotlight which beamed into her, following her path as she sprinted to cover. Carmine's triggermen had picked off a few gunners from a distance, but now the whole compound was alerted to their presence. They'd have to shoot their way in. Amy regained her breath behind the large concrete slab, clearly set up for defensive purposes. As she did, Dutch slid in alongside her. If he was concerned about taking a bullet, he didn't show it. His expression was as stoic as ever. Carmine was considerably further back, tactically using his own men to draw fire before even contemplating an advance. Since the alarm started, gunners were flooding out of the compound. 20 of us against more than I can count. If only she had Liam or Nathaniel to help her rescue Liam and Nathaniel. Carmine had been kind enough to invest even more in their survival, giving Amy a sighted assault rifle. The thing was enormous, and while she knew how to shoot larger guns, she kept it on single fire. Beside her, a smile stretched across Dutch's face. He reached for his belt where several frag grenades were hooked. He removed the first, pulled the pin, and used the cover fire of the triggermen to aim his throw. He saw a set of double doors latched open on the second floor where gunners were flooding out from. And then he threw. The grenade arced, and for a moment it attracted the attention of everyone in the courtyard. A scream emerged from the mass of gunners on the second floor as the grenade hit the top of the doorframe, ricocheting down. Before it touched the ground, an explosion erupted. Some men were turned to a pulp, while others who had attempted to run were flung from the height of the second story, plummeting into the ground at the center of the courtyard. Those who survived to the landing, whether unharmed or with broken bones, were mowed down by machine gun fire. The triggermen knew how to capitalize on such an opportunity. With Dutch at her side, Amy felt unstoppable. She rested the barrel of her assault rifle atop the concrete slab and took aim, prioritizing the sentry turrets first. A few rounds each caused the automated death machines to explode, and that punished any gunners foolish enough to get close. Nathaniel led the way through the corridors of the compound, and Liam trailed behind, still recovering from the beating he'd taken from Commander Eckart. The commotion outside grew more intense, and Nathaniel was thankful for the distraction. Unarmored and carrying a rifle with half a magazine of ammo, not even he could have gotten them out had the gunners not been preoccupied with more pressing concerns. The corridor ended on a high balcony which overlooked what Nathaniel assumed was one of the compound's many atriums. Leaning over the balcony stood a gunner, bellowing commands down to some men below. The badge on his sleeve signified him as a lieutenant. Nathaniel crept up alongside him and grabbed him by the back of his uniform. Before the lieutenant could divert his commanding voice to whatever was behind him, Nathaniel launched him over the railing. As he did so, he used his free hand to pluck the lieutenant's submachine gun from the holster on his hip. He watched the lieutenant fall and crash into 3 gunners rushing out into the courtyard. Nathaniel tossed Liam the submachine gun, and they continued through the next corridor to a set of stairs. At the bottom, the atrium opened up before them. Rather than heading for the main entrance, they navigated to a side exit. On the way, Liam knelt by the unmoving lieutenant's body and looted some extra magazines for his SMG. Nathaniel barged the exit open, and on the other side, the conflict in the courtyard was laid out before them. The gunners were perched behind their cover on various levels, their sight lines being obscured by pillars of smoke billowing from the remnants of what Nathaniel could only assume were destroyed turrets. And to the right, there were 10 to 15 men fighting a hopeless battle. "Look!" Liam slapped an arm on Nathaniel's shoulder and pointed. He noticed Amy and Dutch leading the attack and felt a swelling of pride. Liam looked revitalized too, suddenly fighting for something. His new motivation seemed to clear his head, and he pushed out into the courtyard, beckoning Nathaniel to follow. They knelt behind a stack of sandbags and began providing support to their rescuers. The crossfire, while only provided by 2 men, caused a panic in the defending gunners. Many of them had been hidden from the attackers behind cover, but for most of them that cover didn't account for their flank. Nathaniel put his remaining rounds to use, trying to finish the exposed gunners in one shot. Liam was far less conservative, showering the gunners with bullets. Some dented and sparked against walls and sheets of metal, while others hit home, debilitating gunner after gunner. "I never took you for the spray and pray type, Liam," Nathaniel said as they dropped behind cover to reload. Nathaniel checked his magazine, only 9 more shots. "This hump of metal has a dent in the barrel instead of iron sights. I couldn't hit a mole rat if it was gnawing my leg with this piece of shit," Liam answered as he scrambled to find the magazine release on his gun. "One of the guys you took down, second from the left, behind the stone blockade. He has my sniper rifle. Forget about it for now. If we don't make it to the others, I'm gonna run out of rounds." Liam flinched as a bullet clipped the top of the sandbag above his head. A pinch of sand sprinkled onto his shoulders. I'm going to hit them with another clip. While they're distracted, you get to Amy and Dutch. Then get yourself a proper gun and cover me while I get my rifle. Trust me, I'll be a lot more useful with my gun than I will with this junk. Nathaniel nodded. Count of 3, he said as he peeked over the sandbags to the gunners who were torn between the targets to their front and their flank. 3, Liam's magazine clicked into the submachine gun. 2, Nathaniel eyed his path through the sandbags and debris. 1, Liam launched himself to his feet and spun toward the gunners. He squeezed the trigger and the rounds started flying. Nathaniel dove for the next set of sandbags and then, squatting low to the ground, charged towards the concrete slab Amy and Dutch were using for cover. Bullets showered the ground around him, sparkling up like firecrackers, dangerously close to hitting him. Noticing Nathaniel's approach, Dutch popped up from cover and unloaded rounds at the gunners. 6 shots fired, and somewhere to Nathaniel's left, 6 men fell. The empty casings fell to the concrete and Dutch was already putting more rounds in their place. Liam held the trigger until his ammo was spent before tossing the gun to the side. He vaulted over his cover and sprinted towards the gunners. A few of them noticed his approach and turned to catch him in their sights, but before they could fire, Liam watched as one by one they slumped over, each taking a bullet to the head or chest. The path cleared ahead of them, and he knelt beside the body of the gunner who'd stolen his rifle. Liam felt alive as his weary arms gripped the familiar weight of his rifle. God, it was heavy. At least it felt like it right now, but it was sturdy, reliable. He plucked it up and rested it on the stone blockade. The gunners were exposed from his view and bunched together. He had the perfect view. He watched through the scope as 3 gunners reloaded behind their cover, preparing to fire on Amy and the others. He lined up the shot and fired. The bullet passed through the first gunner's neck, up through the chin of the second, before nestling into the skull of the third. In a mess of blood and broken teeth, the 3 gunners died in synchronization. If he could just make his way to the others now, they'd be able to wait. Liam felt a hard thump crash between his shoulder blades and his head whiplashed backwards as he tumbled over. A heavy hand flipped him over and grasped him by the neck. Blood dripped over his brow from a gash to the forehead, and through the torrent of red he saw Commander Eckart. He raised Liam into the air effortlessly and flung him across the courtyard. As he spun through the air, he caught a glimpse of Amy, and then he slammed against a stack of sandbags. Amy and the others pushed forward to close the distance and support Liam. The triggerman began firing at Eckart, who, before the gunfire could reach him, pulled up the corpse of one of his men as a human shield. The body spasmed as dozens of bullets sunk through its uniform and into the skin. With his right hand, Eckart drew his pistol and triggermen fell like flies. Dutch pulled Liam behind the sandbags and Amy knelt beside him. "You have to go," Nathaniel said. "All of you, take Liam and get out of here. I'll take care of him." "You can't do this alone, Nathaniel," Amy said. Dutch grunted. Amy looked over to Dutch, fear bleeding into her tone. "Are you sure?" Dutch grunted again with a nod. He checked the rounds in his magnum before clicking the cylinder back into place. "Liam can't take much more." Nathaniel looked to Liam, who was fighting against unconsciousness. "Get him to safety and we'll meet up with you." Amy kissed Dutch on the cheek and, after a moment's hesitation, embraced Nathaniel. His shirt was soaked with blood and sweat, and she could feel his heart beating frantically in his chest. She fought back the tears creeping up on her and instead got Liam upright, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "Go, now!" Nathaniel said. Nathaniel vaulted over the sandbags and ran, hopping from side to side to the next stack. Eckart fired twice and missed, roaring in frustration. He looked back. Amy and Liam were coming up on the entrance to the compound and no gunners were in sight. He smiled momentarily and then Dutch emerged, revolver raised in front of him. The muzzle flashed and the bullet flew. Dodging the human shield, it struck against Eckart's helmet, missing his exposed face by inches. The round ricocheted harmlessly into the concrete, leaving nothing more than a dent in the helmet and a rattle in Eckart's skull. The response came suddenly as Dutch lined up the next shot. The first of Eckart's shots caught Dutch in the shoulder. He dropped the magnum and recoiled back as if struck by a car. The second caught him in the chest, bringing Dutch to his knees. He was leaning against the sandbags, his head resting atop of them as he tried to get to his feet. But then came the third shot, which caught him between the eyes. Somewhere beyond him, Amy screamed. Nathaniel couldn't stop to process what he'd seen. He'd heard the unmistakable sound of an empty clip ejecting from Eckart's pistol, and he pounced, leaping over his obstacle and tackling Eckart to the ground. He threw the human shield aside and began battering Eckart's face with bare fists. Carmine, accompanied by his 2 remaining triggermen, watched Amy and Liam leave. Nothing but trouble and caps out of my pocket, he thought. He glanced back across the courtyard. The ghoul lay in a bloody heap, and the other 2 men were on the ground exchanging blows. "All right, boys," he said, turning to his surviving men. "Now's our chance." He pointed his Tommy gun towards the compound, and they made their way inside. On the other side of the gaping double doors at the center of the atrium, he saw it. The cart with the tarp draped over it. Finally, some good fortune. He surveyed the area, checking for gunners, but the place was empty. The few gunners who hadn't died in the courtyard lay lifelessly scattered around the floor. The place was a graveyard, and the loot was there for the taking. He jogged over to the cart and pulled back the corner of the tarp. His eyes grew wide, pupils dilating. Glorious. The cart was heaped full of mini-nukes. He could retire with the caps this haul made him. "Take a look, boys." He made a sweeping gesture towards the cart. "My retirement fund," he laughed. The triggermen looked overjoyed, then concerned. "And yours, of course." He patted both men on the shoulders. They probably had just enough manpower to pull this cart out of the compound. They'd look like chiseled Greek gods by the time they got this back to Bunker Hill. "Let's get the wheels rolling." "We have to keep moving," Liam said, his arms wrapped around Amy, attempting to steady her as she sobbed fitfully. "I should have been there for him." Liam looked back. In the distance, he could make out Nathaniel and Eckart beating each other to a pulp. "No, Amy, he gave his life to save us." He cradled her face in his hands, meeting her eyes. "We can't let their sacrifice be in vain. We need to get out of here." He lifted her back to her feet, and they hobbled up the road away from the compound. Liam didn't have the heart to tell Amy that his rifle wasn't loaded. He had no ammo left. Thankfully, the path was clear, so long as they didn't linger. His punches were weakening with every swing, but Nathaniel didn't stop. He couldn't allow Eckart to regain his composure. He slammed another fist into the commander's exposed face. Blood and broken teeth were littered around the ground on either side of them, and Eckart was barely recognizable beneath the gore. Nathaniel felt a fist crash into the side of him, and air shot out of his lungs. He reeled back, wheezing. Seizing the opportunity, Eckart rammed his head into Nathaniel's, and Nathaniel found himself exposed on his back. The world swung side from side. He grasped his temples, trying to steady himself, but Eckart was already there, and his heavy boot caught Nathaniel in the groin. The overwhelming nausea came over him, combined with the pain of the previous blow. Nathaniel suddenly felt helpless. He scrambled backward, dizzy and disoriented. Eckart strode confidently after him. His face was battered, yet he somehow seemed entertained by the contest. He closed the distance and stomped down on Nathaniel's ankle with a great crack. Nathaniel coughed up red bile. He couldn't even crawl away. Eckart knelt over him. He was holding back a laugh. The smile that followed was foul. Blood foamed through the cracks in his teeth. Red swelled with white. He picked up Nathaniel by the collar and rested him against a stone blockade. Nathaniel didn't resist. Nathaniel couldn't resist. Eckart paced about in front of him like an excited child. He started one way, then turned on his heels. He walked across the courtyard to the field of dead gunners. He reached into one's pocket and found a combat knife. He felt its weight, tossing it between his hands before swiping at the air. Then he nodded. Nathaniel looked around at the ground. Just out of reach was Dutch's dropped magnum, but the thought of leaning to his side made his ribs throb with pain. Eckart was satisfied with his weapon of choice, and he started walking back towards Nathaniel. Then, behind Eckart, coming out of the entrance of the compound, there were 3 triggermen who'd been with Amy. They were pushing something, the cart. The corner of the tarp was peeled back, and beneath it, Nathaniel could make out the subtle red light of a mini-nuke, flashing discreetly. He forgot about the pain in his side for a split second, and he pushed himself to the floor, crawling to Dutch's magnum. He could see Eckart laughing at the effort. The gunner commander pulled a corpse off the ground as a human shield, unfazed by the pathetic attempt to fight back. Nathaniel reached out and gripped the magnum with his right hand. He propped himself up against the blockade and took aim. His sights moved past Eckart and his shield, and the barrel stopped pointing at the cart. Realizing his error, Eckart spun around and saw the cargo. For the first time, Nathaniel saw fear on the bastard's face. He held his breath and pulled the trigger. The muzzle flashed and a .45 round flew. The shot was true, and the mini-nukes exploded one and all in perfect synchronization. Nathaniel watched the ravenous blast consume the triggermen, the compound, and Eckart. The sound deafened him, and the light blinded him, and then the world went black, his senses quenched like a pinched candle flame. The Gunner compound was a smoking ruin. Fire and radiation had devastated everything that had once been there, and the ground was charred black. Lifeless, but for small wisps of smoke and smouldering ashes where the compound's entrance once stood, the calm of the aftermath was interrupted by a peculiar rift. The still air was torn open by an electric blue light, and out of the portal a man materialized, trailed by 2 armed robots. The man stepped across the courtyard, his boots crunching through the ashes of dead soldiers and debris alike. As he moved further from the initial blast, some things remained intact, burned and charred, but intact. He stopped by the corpse and knelt down to inspect it. The man's hair had been burned away, but he could recognize his old friend all the same. "This one," Alan said, standing up and gesturing to the 2 synths. They picked up Nathaniel's corpse by the knees and shoulders, and then disappeared with a blue flash of light. Alan pulled his journal from his lab coat pocket and took note. "Deceased, but the body is intact. Barely." He closed his journal, stood up, and disappeared in a flash of blue light. There was work to be done.